Welcome to this free live recorded lesson, and I'm going to be taking you through every step. I'm not going to be pausing along the way, there won't be fancy editing. We're just going to see exactly how I bring this portrait together from start to finish, really. So because of that, there might be a little bit of background noise as I'm working, and there might be bits that you just want to skip ahead on. Use the chapters down below. I'll take you through all of my materials. I have a whole selection of pencils that are pre-selected, but I might not use all of them. And if you want to know more about the materials, they will be listed down below in the description. You can also find out how to transfer your outline in the description. There is a link to a separate video that shows you how to do that, and also a link to a free ebook that you can download to go with this course, just to help you get all your materials together, the reference photo, and anything else that you might need you can probably find in there. Okay, so to get cracking, I'm going to start with the eye. Now you want to use any black that you have. I've picked out the Bronzeal number 10. Why? Because I'm lazy and it's already sharp. So that's why I'm starting off with this particular black. Now you will find in that downloadable pack that there is also a spreadsheet, or sorry, a worksheet if you like, for comparing different pencil brands. So if you have a collection of Stabilo Carbothello, but I'm using a Faber Castell, you can go onto that chart and you can find which colour matches up as closely as possible. And if there is no colour underneath, it just means that there is no direct match between those two brands. It's quite a useful little sheet to have. So I want you to start by filling in the eye. Now, because I'm aiming this at a sort of beginner plus or early intermediate level, we are going to simplify certain areas. And also because this is I'm saying it's like a live recorded class, I don't plan on editing this too heavily for you guys. I want to keep it as real as possible. We don't want to be sat here all day while I'm putting in every single tiny little detail. So if you want to add additional details, then of course you can. So you can see how quickly we start to get a form around the eye here. Something that I want to point out straight away, there's already a dog hair on my work, what a surprise, is that I have left a little gap between the eyeball and the tear duct. The tear duct is in deep shadow, hence it's going in black, but there is a gap there. And then I'm going to pop in the crease in the eyelid as well. Again, look, I'm leaving a nice gap. My pencil is, I'd say, semi-sharp for this. I'm having to put a fair amount of pressure through the pencil because I am working on the Kanzen velvet paper. This is, in my opinion, a little bit grittier and sandier than the pastel mat. I've come to like it a lot recently, and I think it's also it's more affordable than pastel mat, only by a margin, but I do think it has quite a lot to offer, to be honest. Just get rid of that tiny hair, it's just blowing around. Okay, so something else to draw your attention to straight away. I'm putting in these features around the eye, and then these ones particularly at the bottom. I'm using my pencil a little bit like a HB pencil and just gently shading to create soft edges, and that is adding form, but I'm not pressing as hard. So instead, we're starting to get variations in the lightness and the darkness around this area. So I won't do too much more around here. Again, certain things are going to be simplified. If you look at the photo, I have masked these two sections together. We are losing some detail there, but it's fine because it all reads as an eye, specifically as a pig's eye, I would say. So we're off to a really good start. Now I'm going to keep the black in hand and start to map out where the dark black fur is. So this outline you will be able to find in your free ebook. So if you want to get the outline done more easily, then you can just use the one that is inside the ebook. But I would encourage you to start to learn how to create your own outlines if you do trace anything on, because it does actually help you improve your observational skills. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm mapping out areas. I'm just going to really lightly shade them in, and then I will go and do it properly. But I'm mapping out areas that need to be a fairly dark value. So here is a bit of the lighter fur. So I'm just sort of outlining where that's roughly going to go. And then here we have quite a deep shadow around the crease at the bottom of the ear. So that comes all the way around here. This is all just about seeing value. And that is something that really does take time. And it's something that's quite individual as well. We all see things slightly differently. So I'm just shading areas in for now. It's sort of like thinking out loud by drawing, and then I can go back in and press a little bit harder when I'm happy with where these areas are sitting. So I'm not really worried about the fur direction at this early stage, because right now I'm mapping things out. But at the same time, if you can start to move your pencil in the direction of the fur, it does help a little bit later on. So there's a bit more of a shadow around the eye socket here. There's obviously quite a bit more work to do around the eye socket. And then this is just a portrait that I'm doing today. So I will have a little bit of black under her chin. I'm just going to let this fade out. So you need a little bit because otherwise it looks really odd, but I'm not putting in all of the shoulder. Okay, so while I'm here with the black, before I go back in, as I said, and press a little bit harder, I'm just going to mark out some crescent shapes inside the nostrils. So I say crescent shapes because of the way that the light hits this. We sort of have, as you can see, a crescent shape where it's darkest, and then it gently fades out. So again, just kind of using my pencil a little bit like a HB pencil for that, and getting lighter and lighter with the markings so that they start to fade out. Do think about your pencil pressure, it makes a really big difference. And then I'm going to go back in and just add some black where I think it needs to become really quite dark. So with this paper, you do need to put a fair amount of pressure through your pencil before the tooth of the card is totally filled, which is good for this because actually we have a lot of texture that I want to be able to get in here. So having a thicker pile, if you like, a thicker tooth to the card than the pastel mat is quite advantageous. Although the double portrait that has just come out on the membership of two pigs, Mum and Piglet, that was done on pastel mat. So this is totally possible to do on a different paper. You would just have to be aware that the tooth of the card might fill up a little bit faster, and therefore you might not want to press as hard and you might not be able to get as many layers down. So here you can see I'm thinking about the flow of the fur because it's starting to matter at this stage. So I get that horrible squeaky pencil noise. When I'm doing underpaintings, I do quite like to use my pencil on the side. If you're wondering how I'm gripping my pencil, you can put your pencil down on the desk and come on top of it with a claw-like hand and just pick it up. So your fingers are something like this, and then you allow it to slide backwards in your hand. So I end up holding it in such a way that I can use the whole of the side of the pencil. Nice soft edge here because I'm going into a much lighter section where the light has turned around the form and we get a blast of sunlight on top of the ear. You can see a lot of brown, a lot of warmth inside these areas, which is why I'm not going in with direct black for the underpainting there. Shade over this bit back here. Trying to get in some soft general shading. So using my pencil on the side, you can see I'm moving in small circular motions, and that's just helping to remove the risk of too many shading lines appearing. Getting lighter and lighter with my pencil. That allows the edge to become quite soft. To be honest, this kind of thing can go in further along through the process towards the end as well. Especially as I'm right-handed, it means I'm resting my hand over this as I work. So I'm going to leave that section as is. We have the other ear over here, which isn't completely black. So what I'm going to do again is think about my pencil pressure here and just start to move it around very lightly. Now, I want you to keep this area particularly light in the coverage of pastel, and I will show you why in a little bit. So literally just a light shade. And likewise down at the front over the bottom of the nose where there is a patch of black, just a really light shade for that area. Okay, so that's one pencil so far, basically whichever black you have in your set that you would like to use. And then we're going to start to work on the areas which are still dark, but they're a bit warmer. So I'm taking the 175, which is a Faber Castell pencil, and it is the sepia dark, so it's a really warm dark grey. There will be plenty of other brands that would do a grey similar to this, so do use the pencil comparison chart, which, as I said, if you download the free ebook, you will have that inside there to help you. Okay, so just going to start to, you can see I'm working in small circles, move around the eye. This does feel a little bit more brown than the black. So I'm using a kind of medium pressure, and that is allowing the tooth of the card to show through. Okay, so that is the skin filled in, and then I'm going to twist my paper. Do move your painting so that you can get a good angle to work from that's comfortable for your wrist. So using the same pencil, this is still the 175 from Faber Castell. I'm going to start to sweep it on and off the page to show the direction of the fur. So it kind of fans out. See, I'm going over the edges of the black and joining those two sections together. And it comes down right down to the cheek down here. Again, just pressing a little bit harder for these areas. A little patch of dark fur over the bottom of the cheek. Then we're going to have some lovely changes in fur direction that'll happen in here. So all I do is I pause so that I can look at my reference photo properly, decide if I need any more of the pencil in hand. So I want a little bit inside the ear, the rest of the ear becomes a purpley pink colour. And just a little bit on the top. Coming over here, I'm going to bring the black fur up a little bit further. Okay, so with most of the dark in now, we can start to work on the different colours and values that we see. I'm going to begin with the highlight that is over on the left-hand side of the face because it is so important, and that's really going to round us out. A lot of the portrait is actually quite flat because the light sort of stops about here, and then all the way back we just have this really flat lighting, but we get little lifts, like with the ear, for example, if we were to do more of the portrait coming down the legs as well. So it is nice lighting, but don't be fooled, it's actually quite tricky because it's not beautifully lit all over. We have an area of intense light that's blown out, and then we have details in the shaded plane on this occasion. So for the edge, I'm going to pick out the 811 Bismuth White from Caran d'Ache. You don't need to go and buy Caran d'Ache, don't worry. This is basically a warm white, a creamy white, but you could use something like the Stabilo Carbothello 100, which is their white. You could use the 101 from Faber Castell, which is their white. It doesn't have to be specifically this really warm white from Caran d'Ache. Now, I say really warm, it's still a white, it's not an ivory. So right at the bottom of my page, I have these little swatches. This is an ivory from Conte, and you can see that if I put this bismuth white next to it, that looks yellow. So don't be tempted to swap this for an ivory because it is likely to be too yellow instead of white enough. So I've already got pastel running down my hand, which is very predictable. So I'm just going to grab some crystal paper. Now, crystal paper is really, really useful. It is kind of like a greaseproof paper. Just grab a sheet, So it's sort of like a greaseproof paper or freezer paper, and basically it means that you can rest your hand on top of it and the work underneath doesn't get smudged. So it's a really good way to store your work as well. But if you do rest your hand over crystal paper while you're working, just remember to lift it up occasionally and check your work underneath, because otherwise you're kind of working in isolation and you forget what the rest of the work looks like, and you might take an area too bright or too dark because of that. So 811, and I'm just going to begin up at the top and move my way down. So I'm sweeping my pencil on and off the page, and that's going to give me soft beginnings and endings to these pencil marks that just allow me to join it all together a little bit more easily. Now in the photo, if you look, you can see the other eye here. For the drawing, we're simplifying things. So what I've done is I've brought the angle inwards a little bit to show where the eye socket is, to show where the brow is, and then back out for the bottom of the socket. And I think we're going to get away with that for this portrait. So again, sweeping it on and off the page, I'm going to bring it over the top of the snout. And I'm sweeping it on and off as I go around those markings. So I lay the marking in fairly thick, like so. So it's quite a hard mark, and then sweep it on and off the page, and that softens it out, and you can see you start to get some, I describe it as sparkly light. Now if you're working on pastel mat and your work doesn't look quite the same, it is probably because of the paper, and as I said, that paper doesn't have quite as thick a tooth as this paper does, and because of that it fills in a little bit faster, so you won't be able to enjoy a grainy edge for quite as long. Equally, in certain instances, it's really useful to be able to fill in the paper a little bit faster. So I'm just going to bring this down under the chin. Usually these kind of features I would put in towards the end, but because this rim light is just so important, I do want to have an element of it in right at the beginning, but at the end is where we'll put in the tiny details. So all those little hairs, they will go in at the end. So while I'm here, I'm going to do the same on the top of her ear, because you can see that it becomes completely blown out and overexposed. So that is, again, quite an important area for the drawing, because it's going to allow it to round out and make sense of the lighting. So lifting the pencil again on and off the page, and once more, we'll do a lot of the edge details right at the end. Just bring this down. So this will just help us basically see where we're going with everything else, decide if it's too light or too dark. So we have, you're probably thinking there's loads more light over here, and there is more light to go in, but I'm going to do it now with a slightly darker pencil, because this is all the underpainting stage, and then it allows me to weave other colours on top. So I'm going to go in with the 700, which is a Stabilo Carbothello. Again, use the pencil comparison chart as you need to. Now you might be wondering why I'm using a variety of different pastel pencil brands. So part of it is just because I have collected these different brands over the years, and now I just have random preferences of each colour in each brand, but also because I'm working on the velvet paper from Canson, this paper does prefer, struggling to get my words out, a slightly softer pencil, and it does work slightly better. So the Faber Castell, which is my old-time favourite, that's the one I always used to use pretty much exclusively, that doesn't work in general quite as well on this paper because they are harder. However, this must be caveated with the fact that different pigments, so different colours, will change the nature of a pencil. So one pencil from Faber Castell could be softer than another because the colour is different. So you get a feel for that kind of thing. But I have picked out a few of the Carbothellos just to help me out a little bit. Okay, so start to bring the light round. And now we need to get in the base for the ginger fir. So for the base, I'm going to use again a Carbothello pencil. I'm going to go in with the 685. I don't know all these numbers yet. 685 is this one down here on my little swatch list. And again, just use the pencil comparison chart if you need to. Now, something that I do like Stabilo Carbothello for is their range of these orangey blonde browns. They are really, really useful, and it's not a range of colours that I think Faber Castell do particularly well, to be honest. So that is why I started using quite a lot of the Stabilo Carbothellos last year, just to help me with this colour range. It was much easier than mixing colours out of the Faber Castell, especially if people were beginner level or just moving into the intermediate. But they're also quite soft. So sometimes, as I said way back at the beginning of this video, sometimes a soft pencil's good and sometimes a hard pencil's good. Sometimes a toothier paper is good and sometimes one with less tooth is good. It depends on your project and it depends on your drawing style. But for this kind of thing where we have a toothier card that enjoys a softer pencil and we want to get multiple layers down, then softer pencils can be quite useful for that because we can retain clarity as we start working through the layers. They don't stop putting pigment down. Obviously, the flip side of that is that the pencils can start to mix together more readily because they're soft, but because this isn't super small, we should be pretty much okay. If this was a really small drawing, then we would have to worry a bit more about the different colours accidentally blending together because it's a smaller area. Okay, so we've just marked out the ginger spots. These are all going to change. We've got white to pull over some places. We've got black to put into others. This is your underpainting, so it's the basic stage. So now I'm going to go back to Faber Castell and use the 180. I know that there is an alternative pencil for this in the Stabilo Carbothello range, so use that chart if you've got Stabilo pencils. You will find an alternative for this one, but it's a nice neutral brown is how I like to think of the 180. So it's not particularly warm and it's not particularly cool either. It's about I'd say like a dark mid-tone, but at the same time, it's not a super dark brown and it's not super light either. So it's quite a nice one to just knit things together and provide a little bit of sort of a background cushioning, you could say. It doesn't necessarily draw attention to itself too much. So just popping it around the snout where we can see these bits of brown. You can see I'm being very general with this. I'm not labouring over this too much. And then I'm going to use the same pencil for the chin. So once more, you can see that there is plenty that will go over the top of this because we have those tiny little hairs that need to fit into this space. All right, just bring a little bit more of this brown. Bring it up a little bit. It does add to the idea that she's smiling, which is really nice. So you can see I've left a bit of a gap here. I'm going to put some pinks in there, I think. Probably a bit of brown over the top as well might be required to make it dark enough, but we'll wait and see. So just pop that pencil back. For anyone wondering, my pencil holder here is modular packaging. So if you're into your Warhammer and painting tiny figurines, you'll be very familiar with this stuff. And you can just get it cheap as chips online. It is quite useful. And to be honest, it does last forever. You can see I've just put tape around the side of mine just to stop the modules falling apart because I had big sheets and I cut them down. But it is really useful. So if you're wondering, that's what that stuff is. Okay, let's pop in where the white fur is going to sit. I'm going to use the 700 again. I've got quite a shock of it around here, which will be coming lighter and warmer. Again, this is the underpainting, so it's the general stage. I'm also trying to resist getting every pencil out of the box and attempt to do this portrait with a bit of a limited palette, but we'll see how that goes. I often say that and then end up just pulling out all my pencils anyway. Okay, so we'll just bring this around the chin, where the fuzz becomes quite thick. Obviously, we'll have lots of detail to do over this as well. And then we'll use some pink. So I'm going to use the 132 pencil that I've loved for many years. This is a Faber Castell pencil, the 132. It's quite a salmon-y kind of pink, so it's not really orange and it's not really purple. It's a bit desaturated. And on the paper, it comes out at a very similar value to the paper, which means that their lightness and darkness is quite similar. And although the colour of this pencil is obviously different to the colour of the paper, because the values are quite similar, the pink doesn't stand out too much. So I'm just going to start to mark in these pink areas. You can always take them darker later on and muddy them. Again, this is the underpainting stage. So this is the generalised stage. So if you're wondering how to figure out an underpainting, or maybe even what they are, then an underpainting should be a general idea of each area of the drawing. So that means that you take the general value, the general lightness or dark for an area, and you put it in. So you're not going into all the little details of this bit is slightly lighter or this bit is slightly darker, and you don't create surface texture. And likewise for colour. So you can see I'm being really general with this ear. I am going to nuance this a little bit, even at the underpainting stage, but I've just laid that in as a pink. I'm going to do the same for the nose, and likewise I am going to nuance this a little bit even at the underpainting stage, but I want to get this pink down so that there is a general colour all over the nose. And then I'll just adjust some of the colour, some of the values in this to stop it feeling so flat. Okay, so just pop that one back. I'm trying to keep them in order, which is unusual for me. I'm going to go in with the 642 from Stabilo Carbothello. I am, however, I'll just show you, I am actually very tempted to use the violet grey 093. This is Caran d'Ache. This is brand new. I haven't used it before apart from to create a swatch down there, but a student recommended this to me actually and said, you must try this pencil. And I'm a sucker for buying new materials, so I went and bought it. And I do actually think this could be really nice for the front of the nose, so I might have just persuaded myself to use that, but you could use this 642. I think you just want to be a little bit light with the 642. It is quite highly pigmented and it's very soft. Caran d'Ache, also soft, also highly pigmented, but this isn't a really bright colour. You can see this is much more blue than the 642. If I just put some of this down for you, see this is more of a purple, this is more of a blue purple, hence it's a violet grey, which makes sense. They both work for this area. So I'm going to use my Caran d'Ache because it's new and I can't resist it. So I don't have a full set of the Caran d'Ache because they are incredibly expensive, and not just that, but they are a very, very soft pastel pencil, and I actually find that they arrive to me broken a lot of the time. So that is incredibly frustrating when you are paying about £4.50 a pencil. They really aren't cheap. So because of that, I've never bothered buying a full set because I don't want to fall in love with them and then end up wanting to buy them all the time. So I have a few Caran d'Ache that I try for certain things. I buy some occasionally when I think I haven't got a colour for a specific place, or colours that I particularly struggle with. So these kind of bistery colours, the yellowy browns, that's the word I'm looking for. They can be a little bit tricky to get the correct versions of sometimes. And so occasionally I'll just treat myself to a new pencil and see if Caran d'Ache might fill that colour gap. But as I say, with those yellowy, orangey browns, actually Stabilo Carbothello have done me proud on that one. So I'm just going to use some more of my violet grey. You could definitely use the 642 for this and bring it into the lips. So I'm shading this down into the 180, which is the brown. And let's just fill in that black a little bit more now, especially as I've gone over the top of it messily with the Caran d'Ache. So again, you can use whichever black you want. We're going to be warming up these nostrils and adding some reds in there too. Once more, must stress, this is the underpainting stage and it's quite simplistic. So we'll just pop those purples back and we'll address the inside of the ear quickly before the underpainting stage is about done. So I'm just going to tap my work off. You can see I've got little bits of pastel that are getting caught on it. So you can blow this off. I'm trying to resist doing that because I'm obviously attempting to record this live. So you can tap it off, blow it off, and then you can use your rubber for things that don't move. So I'm going to take the 180, use it on the side because that gives me a nice flat application. And you don't need to put loads of pressure through it. It should show up pretty well. And I'm just going to give myself that shadow for the inside of the ear. Making this edge nice and soft so it disappears. And then with that done, I can then pick up the 131, I believe it is. Yes, 131. It's like pencil roulette. And there is an area of light coming through where the pink becomes more saturated. So again, I'm actually not putting very much pressure through this pencil at all. And it's just catching, you can see a little bit more life at the back of the ear. And then we can do the same down here at the front. So a little bit more saturation, just where the light is coming through that skin and it's illuminating it. That is the word, it's illuminating it. So if you're wondering while you're watching this, my sort of, shall we say, official tutorials that are inside the membership, they're done in this kind of style in that I don't do a voiceover on them. They are done live in real time, but I do a little bit of editing to clean them up, and the pencil numbers are always on screen, and then they're just broken down into steps, which the workbook follows along with. But because this is YouTube, I'm just putting it all together for you. So use the chapters and save this video so you can return to it, and that should make it much more manageable. So to get going with the fur details now, I'm going to start by sharpening up the Caran d'Ache. Now, if anyone follows these tutorials, you'll probably already know I sharpen my pencils with a Stanley knife and some sandpaper. But for the Caran d'Ache, because they break on me so much, I've actually just had to start using an ordinary pencil sharpener. Because basically the inside of these pastels are already broken, and then the stress of sharpening them my usual way, it basically exposes just too much of the pastel and it just drops out because these are in pretty tiny pieces inside there. So I'm not even sure if this is going to work really, but I do need to try and get this a little bit sharper. The bismuth white, the 811, and the Caran d'Ache Chinese white, the 901, despite the fact that I do struggle to get them sharp, and therefore, are they really good value for money? Probably not. There we go, it's broken, we'll try that again. They are my preferred whites. Now, the reason they are my preferred whites, feel free to skip ahead at this point if you're not interested, is they are really beautifully pigmented. So they show up really well. Often an issue that you have with white is that if the pencil isn't, particularly high quality, the amount of pigment in there isn't strong enough and the white just doesn't really show up over the top of anything. Now on this specific paper, if we have a look at the bottom, you can see I've got Chinese white is this one here. This is the bismuth white. So these two are Caran d'Ache, but this one on the end is actually Stabilo Carbothello, not a very expensive pencil at all, and usually quite a weak white. But because these have gone down over clean card here, and this card, it likes a softer pencil, it has a really good tooth to it, it's caught enough of this Stabilo Carbothello to make it quite bright and nice. All right, so I'm going to start with my bismuth white. I might end up using some of the Stabilo Carbothello, probably a little bit of pink, believe it or not. And we're going to begin to add texture to this section here. So using the 811 from Caran d'Ache, or your alternative, as already discussed, we're just going to start to make some fur markings. So I say we're just going to start to make some fur markings. I have a whole video, free video on this if you would like to know more, but I will talk you through what I'm doing, and then if you're still struggling, you just need to go away and practice some of the techniques that are in those free videos. So basically you want to move the pencil before it even touches the paper, and then keep it moving while you lift it off the page. And that's really important because it allows you to get some nice soft details. If you literally thwack it down on the page or start with it on the page, then you're putting pressure through and then pull it, you end up with really thick marks and they don't feel like fur by the end. So you can practice this on ordinary copy paper from a printer with an ordinary HB pencil, believe it or not. And actually it's a really good way to start practicing because a pencil is quite a familiar tool for all of us, whereas the Pastel pencils, gosh, words. The pastel pencils for a lot of people feel a bit unusual, and they are much softer than an ordinary pencil. They don't behave the same, and I think really you need a bit more dexterity. You need to be better at drawing to wield them and get these nice markings, whereas doing it on ordinary paper I think is easier to begin with. So you could start to get your technique down and get happy with it, and then move on to your more expensive materials and see what happens. So do go and check out those videos. I'll have linked them below for you. And I think there are some free worksheets as well. So I will endeavour to remember to put those down for you as well, because they really are worth having a look at and following along with if you're struggling with your fur technique. So while I have been babbling along, I've been filling this front section in, but I'm allowing plenty of space in the card at the same time. So I'm not filling up all of the available space. I'm allowing that underpainting to show through. What I'm also thinking about is the concentration of these markings. So over on the left, we have a lot more light and it's foreshortened over there, which means we're not looking at it face on. We're looking at it from the side. And what you'll notice is if you look at my fingers, if we look at something face on, we can see the gaps between the fingers, they're quite wide. And then if I start to turn my hand, the gaps appear to get smaller until they disappear. So that is basically what we're seeing happen over here. The gaps between the hairs appear smaller, we can't see them. And then as the snout turns around towards us, the gaps appear to get bigger over here. So that's what I'm trying to emulate. So a higher concentration of markings over on the left-hand side. And then as we move towards the center, they spread out. So you can see already that starts to have a really lovely effect. And then putting these markings over the top of the grey as well. These won't show up incredibly bright, obviously like they do up there, but they will still show up and they do add texture. So it is important that you put those in. So I'm pressing fairly hard with this pencil. It's quite a forgiving process, to be honest, because these are fairly coarse fur markings in the first place. Got a few more to get in up here, and then I need to swap to a different colour and then potentially return to this. It's quite tempting to just overdo the bismuth white because it looks really nice. So again, I'm just looking at the photograph, trying to see where the density is brightest, highest. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to keep moving around. I do want my areas of ginger fir to be a little bit more colourful. They are muddied slightly in the actual photograph, but I'd quite like mine to retain a bit more colour if possible. So as I move further around, we still have some lighter hairs, but they're not as bright. I'm going to use this pencil from Stabilo Carbothello. It is the 681, and you can see that it looks like it should be a light pink, but the reason I love this pencil is because it's a bit rubbish. Basically, it's not got a ton of pigment in it, and the outer coating of the pencil suggests it's going to be quite a strong baby pink, but it's really, really not. In most instances, it actually shows up as a warm grey to my eye, which is really useful. So you can see if we start going in with this, doesn't look like we're putting pink down. It just looks like a slightly softer version of the ivory. It's got some warmth to it, but it doesn't really look like pink. To be honest, you can weave pink into ginger fir anyway. It does look really nice. So Stabilo Carbothello, softer pencil. Probably don't need as much pressure through it as you did with the Caran d'Ache. Don't expect it to show up as brightly as the Caran d'Ache. As I said, this is a weaker pencil. I'm going over the edge of some of the black with this, starting to join sections together. You can wipe the nib of the pencil off if you need to as well. It could well pick up some black as you're moving around and then muddy the ginger areas. So do just keep an eye out for that. Still thinking about the changes in the fur direction, still moving my pencil before it hits the paper and then moving it as it leaves the paper. I'm also thinking about the length of the fur. That is also, of course, really important. Okay, so we're going to get a touch darker, and I'm actually going to add more colour. As I said, I quite like the intensity of colour, so I'm going to make it feel a bit richer than it is. So I've picked out the 620, the 620 from Stabilo Carbothello, and it's nicely sharpened. What I'm going to do is start to work in between the lighter hairs So this can be quite a slow process. You really don't need to go as fast as I go. But I'm going to work into these little negative shapes that have appeared. And you can see I'm making the shadow darker. So although I'm using the fur technique in that I'm moving the pencil swiftly, I'm moving it before it hits the page and I'm moving it while it leaves the page, sorry. I'm not necessarily drawing actual fur at this stage. I'm kind of drawing bizarre little shapes that have appeared between the fur markings that I've put down. So these could be small triangles, they could be diagonally slanting rectangles that get bigger at one end and smaller at another. So just have a little bit of a play with this stage. Don't need to add loads. What I usually say is as you go through your pencil selection, each layer probably has a few fewer, that is terrible English, I do apologise. Each layer probably has fewer hairs than the one before. So let's continue. Let's get a little bit lighter again. This is how you build the fur texture. You kind of go backwards and forwards between your light and your dark values. So now I've picked out the 690. I'm starting to get to the stage where I wouldn't need to add too much more because I'll start to overwork this too quickly. 690 is one of these really nice light yellowy brown colours that I was speaking about that Faber Castell just don't offer. So if you look at the pencil comparison sheet, it might suggest a yellow, but the yellow will look a bit different to this. So it could suggest the 184, you'd need to check, but the yellow from Faber Castell would have a different effect on the page, whereas this is less yellow overall. So basically just adding a little bit more colour to the lighter values. Value just means light or dark. Pop a few in over here and warm it up a little bit. Get some in on this edge. I've got quite a bit of colour up here, which is really nice. You can see already we're getting a lovely texture and sense of light. A few light hairs up here I'd quite like to get in. I'm pressing a little bit harder as I go over the top of the black, stopping and wiping the pencil off a little bit as I go. Let's bring some of these hairs further up over the face and towards the eye. So I want to go darker once more and then go lighter to finish. So I need a brown that's a bit darker than the ones I've used. 180 is a good bet for this. And I'm going to start on the darker side. And again, I'm trying to pick out some little shapes between the lighter hairs that I've already laid in. So these shapes could be quite small. Definitely start on the right hand side for this. You can go back over the top of some of the shadows that you've already made as well. They want to be a little bit darker in places. You can also help to outline some of these lighter hairs that I've put down here, look. So they're a little bit harder to see. Look how they start to pop out a little bit more. Quite swift pencil markings again. So if you're a beginner, this is tricky and you will want to definitely practice your pencil techniques. I find that some beginners pick up the ability to create fur really easily, alarmingly easily, and then other people will struggle with it for a bit longer. We've all just got different ways of seeing and interpreting what we see. And so if you're really good at fur very quickly, it might just be that there's another area that you're actually not as good as somebody else who's currently struggling with fur. So that might be underpainting, it could be seeing colours, it could just be picking out your palette to start with, but you might already have a really good knack for drawing fur, for example. So, as I said, I want to go lighter again, once more on that to finish it off. So I'm going to return to the bismuth white, which is the 811 from Caran d'Ache. And I'm just going to start to head back over the top. You can see this freshens those markings up. We don't need to add quite as many of these markings. Look at all of that texture that we've managed to weave into there. Let's pop a few few hairs onto this area to help lift this up a little bit more. So a few hairs at the top that are catching really nice amount of light as they cross over into the black fur. So I am, if you've noticed as well, I am twisting my pencil while I work. That is something that I just developed over a few years, and now I can't draw fur without twisting it. I don't actually think about it anymore. But again, that's something that's a little bit tricky if you're just starting out, so don't worry about it. You can end up just throwing your pencil across the room by accident. That's Mr. and Mrs. Next Door's dog on cue for some nice background noise for a bit of variety. Okay, so I think I've taken that light area on the face bright enough. I already have quite a good realistic texture and light that's coming over the piglet, which is really nice to see at an early stage because it's quite encouraging as we move on to do the rest of it. So I'm literally just going to work backwards for now and then probably come down to do the snout. I'm going to leave the ear for the moment too. The ear itself is quite a flat shape. If you have a look at the photograph, the values of the ear don't really change that much. So I want to get the rest of this in, and then that's sort of like a supporting feature. It needs to be there because we know that pigs naturally would have 2 ears, but it's not actually doing a lot to help with the lighting of the portrait. So because we've already got established with this fur colour, I'm going to move up to this patch over here. Now that patch hasn't got as much light, so it should be a little bit more dull than the one we've put in, but I think I'm going to continue with a fairly nice amount of colour, but just not make it quite as bright, of course, as we have over on the left-hand side. So we've already put down some of the 685. That's our base colour here, which is actually a really good match. So I'm going to go in with the lighter 690 to begin with. So this won't show up too much, but there is a difference in value and there is a difference in colour. You can see this is more yellow. Again, try and think about the fur direction as you're doing this because it does change even in this tiny little space. So just like we did over on the other patch to begin with, you don't want to fill up all of that underpainting straight away. We're going to be wanting to take elements of this quite dark as well. It is woven into the black fur. So this is the 620 from Stabilo Carbothello. Nice and sharp. It's a pencil that we started using over there for the shadows as well. And then we're going to move into black for some of these shadows. So again, I am twisting my pencil. It helps to keep my pencil sharp, but don't feel that you need to. And then I'm going to pick up the black. So I've just picked up my Brunswick 10 because, as I said at the beginning, I am lazy and this is a nice sharp pencil, but you can use whichever black you have. So you can see I'm just starting to weave the black fur up over those edges, and in places we're bringing it right into that area of light fur. So you can really use the reference photo for inspiration on this section. You can see how little clumps are formed by the black fur dividing up the lighter fur. Got some more black fur that really rips into this here. Breaks up the shape. Shade in this area a little bit more. Pencil squeaking. Such an awful noise, isn't it? Okay. And then I'm going to go back over with the original pencil, my underpainting pencil, the number 685 from Carbothello, Stabilo Carbothello. Just pull a few more hairs out. See, I'm able to break up the black shapes that I've gone in with as well. don't think that really needs much more work doing to it at this stage, to be honest. So if this was a real tutorial on my membership, I would be breaking up all of these different stages, so you'd go away and complete something and come back. So do remember to take breaks as you're following along with this. I'm then going to fill in the section at the top as well, much the same, starting with the 690. It's lighter on the top. I'm going to need quite a bit of black woven into this section. So I'm going to go straight in with the black this time. And as I do, I'm going to also weave these sections together. So I have some lighter values that need to go onto the black fur. But using the fur technique, I'm starting to weave the black down into this as well as up into the little patch that I've just started filling in. So I'm just putting a few black hairs into this work. It's going to help to basically weave sections together and make it all feel cohesive, like all of this fur is sat on the face. It's all the same, it's all sat on the same structure, it's just different colours. We don't want it to feel as though it's disjointed, like a jigsaw puzzle that's not been put together properly. Okay. Making really good progress. Like how quickly everything starts to feel quite solid. It's really great. So for this section at the top, we need to go a little bit lighter, but I don't want to introduce loads of colour to the lighter hairs. So I'm going to again use the rubbish pink, which I really like, the 681 from Stabilo Carbothello. And you don't need to put a lot of pressure through it. We don't want it to show up even that much, to be honest. What this is going to do is reduce some of that colour because it's a bit milky and increase the value just a little bit because it's a bit rubbish, so it doesn't show up too much. Again, as I say, there's a use for everything, and the fact that that's not a very strong pink is actually really useful in a lot of situations to me. So, as I said, I'm kind of just moving my way around the drawing. You can fill in a drawing in any way that you like. I'm going on a small tangent here, sorry guys. I often have people say, you know, should I specifically do this first, followed by this, or I've done it wrong because I've done it the opposite way around to you. There isn't a right and wrong. So when I draw for myself, I don't even necessarily always put in all of the underpainting before I start. Now, if you're a beginner, I would try and encourage you to fill in the whole underpainting to begin with, because what it does is it sets up the big areas of light and dark, and then you can decide whether it looks 3D or not in a very simplistic way, but does it look 3D? And then you can start to fill in your details, starting wherever you like, you know, really wherever takes your interest is where you should begin. So there is no right or wrong. I'm basically just moving my way around. I enjoy doing the fur. So I'm going to move down into the eye next. We've got some lovely dark browns to weave in, and we've also got some light to get onto the skin. So for the light on the skin, it's not actually that bright. I'm going to begin with the 706, which is a dark grey, and I'm going to try and basically leave quite a bit of the tooth of the card as I go, because I quite like the sandy colour coming through. It really lends to that feeling of skin. So there are other greys that you could use. Again, I think the 273 from Faber Castell would be a good match for this. I'm going to use this pencil to put the reflection in on the eye, and I'll use the black as well at this point, just to basically cut back into this reflection and neaten everything up. So if I take the black, I can then work my way around the reflection and make the edges neater. What I'm going to do is make this right hand side of the reflection, I'm going to make that the sharp edge, the found edge. And then I'm going to use the black really, really lightly in small circles over the left hand edge, which is going to become softer. That just helps to make the eye feel rounded. Okay, so small reflection is in, back to the 706, yes, 706. I do have to just keep checking. There are so many numbers and I know I do get them wrong from time to time. So I'm going to start back over here because this is where we have quite a big area of light. Probably going to need a slightly lighter grey for some of this, but I also need to add in a bit more black here and there as well, so the contrast will have changed. I'm picking out these areas where a bit of light is hitting. Right, swapping back to the black. Hopefully you can see it too. All of this can go a little bit darker. So what I'm doing to fill this in, I'm not pressing really hard. I'm moving my pencil with about a medium to light medium pressure in small circles. Again, the reason for this is it makes everything soft. I don't get shading lines, but I'm also managing to retain some of that gritty nature of the paper, which I'm really enjoying for the texture of the skin. So I'm using that paper grain to my advantage. Usually I'd want to fill all of that grain in and get rid of it, but in this situation it's actually really useful. All right, so let's very carefully add a bit of some lighter grey in. So light grey, this is the 700. Again, really light pressure, small circles. Got that reflection there. And then light pressure, small circles. Because this is going over the top of black and grey, it's not coming out too bright, but I'm also being really careful not to put very much pressure through the pencil. So I want to start working on the fur around that section, and then we can see whether what I've done for the eye is enough or if we will have to do some more. So I'm going to begin with the black, sweep this pencil on and off the page, and the fur really does start to come quite close to the eye. It's got some lovely little areas where the fur sort of turns and creates a lazy S shape. Okay, so pop my black back and I can get one of my dark browns. So there are two different dark browns that I've got out. I've got the 177 here and the 176 there. The 176 is a little bit lighter. I'd say it's a little bit more matte and it's got a tiny bit more colour in. So I'm actually going to go for the 176. Usually I always go for the 177. It's a walnut brown. Pretty much my favourite dark brown. It is something I think that Faber Castell are really good at, is a selection of dark browns that are not only actually dark, but they're quite rich in their colouring too. And they're not all red. I often find quite a lot of dark browns in other brands. They're just really red all the time and you've not got an option for you just want a chocolate brown. That's kind of what Faber Castell offers. These are going over the top of these areas of black. It's going to be quite a subtle effect, really, if we think about it. The dark brown over a black, the values are very similar. So again, look, I'm lifting my pencil at every opportunity to make sure that these edges are kept really nice and light. All right, so just weaving a little bit of this brown into these areas as well. Again, it just helps to knit things together. I often say that, but it is a good thing to think about. You know, when you do an underpainting, you're working in various different areas. We're being very, very general. And because of that, you can end up in a situation where you don't necessarily always join the ends and you don't join it all in. So we do want to weave the different textures in and out of each other and the different colours as well. It does really, really help for a much better finish at the end. So this is still the 176 from Faber Castell. But as I say, use that pencil comparison chart. You will be able to find other dark browns to use. So I'm just going to bring this down over the cheek because it is also required down there. Feel free to just pause and mark your place at any point when you want to stop and catch up to where I am at. You don't need to draw as quickly as this. So still lifting the pencil on and off so that we get nice fluid marks, even though these are fairly thick, coarse hairs. Okay, so I'm going to return to the black. Because I have it, I'm going to use the Koh-i-Noor 12. It's a pencil I discovered last year, and actually, it's just a black, but it is super dark, and it really, really surprised me, and I've absolutely loved using it. So it's nearly all gone now. And they're not very easy to get hold of individually. I think I've found them on eBay, but that's pretty much it. But it's a really dark, doors slamming in the wind. It's a really dark black. This is the thing. A pencil might say it's black, but they're all a bit different. So it doesn't really matter. Use whatever you have. I'm just using this because it's very soft and I know it shows up really well. So it just gives me that nice sort of glossy dark finish. So I can go in between these brown hairs, just add a little bit more depth to them, just as we've done all over the rest of the fur, going, as I say, backwards and forwards between the lighter values and then the darker ones to build up our textures. Just pop some down here on the cheek, so whichever black you've got a bit of a darker patch down here. And may as well, as we're around this area, work up to the dark section by the ear as well. So while it's in hand, just use whichever black you've got and make sure that the black for that shadow at the base of the ear is now properly filled in. So as I said, on this paper, you do have to work a little bit harder to fill in the tooth of the card. You could use something like a soft tool if you want. These come, well, they don't come with, but they are sold by the people who made Pastel. It's now been sold to Golden actually, so it's all owned by Golden. But you can use a makeup blender, you can use a finger. Make sure your finger is dry and oil free. When you do that, make sure it's clean. But it basically just helps push your pastel into the little grains and grooves of the card, which is quite useful. So while I've got this in hand, basically I'm gonna finish off all this dark fur. We might as well. I've only got little sections left really. As I said, it's that sort of joining up the dots, joining up all these little areas. Got some lighter hairs that we can add in over the top, maybe towards the end for the hairs right on the outside. Okay, so we had started all this by looking at the eye. I'm going to return to the eye before, I'm not splitting this into steps, but before I make this step kind of complete. 175 first. Just going to use that really lightly and glaze over the top of the edges of these lighter sections so that they blend in a little bit better. And then return to my lighter values. So this is the 700, which you want to be very careful with. I'm scumbling this around. I'm allowing little gaps in it so that I can get that sort of mottled texture that runs over the skin. .706, this is a slightly darker brown. Just a little bit of glazing to make everything sit together nicely. Nice. Don't think I need to do much more to the eye. Obviously you can take it further if you want to, but I'm not wanting to make this too much of an advanced tutorial if possible. I'm terrible for saying that and then just adding loads and loads of details. So I want to progress the fur around here. This went in with the 700, which is, to be honest, quite a nice match for that area. So now I have the decision of how to finish this off. I think probably a weaker white. This is the Carbothello 100, and then moving backwards to the 700 and probably a bit of the 706 as well. So we'll see how that goes. So when I say weaker white, so the Stabilo Carbothellos, they do have a fair amount of pigment in them, but the white in general I find a little bit weak. And on this paper it shows up pretty all right, but it's not as bright as the Caran d'Ache. So because of that, it's not showing up over the top of that grey in a particularly bright and vibrant manner. It is adding a little bit of texture, especially in person. If you can't see it on the screen, just give it a go in person and you'll see what I mean. But at the same time, it's not making this area nearly as bright as it is over there. And that's what I want to avoid. So I'm just working over the top. Swapping to the grey for some of this edge work, where again I'm weaving the different sections together. So purposefully pulling these hairs over the top of the black hairs down here. And then using the grey, I can start to bring those lighter hairs over the top of the 180, which is the brown on the chin. So I mentioned that at the beginning, that we have a lot of these lighter hairs. Now, these hairs are a little bit crazy. They don't all run in exactly the same direction. So I am twisting my pencil and allowing it to create slightly random marks. And you can see these are all crisscrossing over each other. So just take your time on this. It might be a little bit tricky for you to get that effect. Just need a little bit of practice. So I just keep stopping and having a look at the reference photo. It's quite highly concentrated with the lighter hairs around this section. And then as we move over the chin, it just gets more and more sparse. So fewer hairs are required. So I'm trying to draw the hairs out of this grey sort of rim that I created at the bottom. And as we come around to this section, there are very few hairs. So just dot the pencil on and off. And then for this bit, we may as well finish it off while we're here. Swap to the bismuth white. And these little hairs are much brighter. So this area was filled in with bismuth white at the beginning, which is why I've picked it back up again. We will obviously do some little wispy hairs right over the edges as well, but they're not going to go in quite yet because they are liable to get smudged. So I'm just going to disrupt the edge so that it doesn't look like it's one harsh line. Just dot the bismuth white in a little bit so it doesn't just go bismuth white, grey, and again they are knitted together. We'll continue with this grey now. So scumbling over these areas. The pink that went in, if you remember, I said, oh, I might go over this with a bit of grey. So what I'm doing very lightly with the 700 is just scumbling over the top, and it's reducing the amount of colour in there, and just starting, because this is like a glaze, it's generalising this whole area, which means we're reducing the amount of details in there, and as we're glazing, we're making everything more similar to each other because we're putting one colour over the top, but very lightly. A glaze really is done in a transparent colour, and this is opaque, it's got white in it. So you just need to be quite light with the pencil, because otherwise you will cover up everything underneath, which isn't what we're trying to do. So taking the 700, I'm going to start to bring the grey light that is around the snout. If you look at this section, this is feeling quite nicely finished. So I'm going to bring the grey light that is over the wrinkly snout and join that into the bismuth white, which we've already put in on the other side. I'm just going to strengthen that up, clean it up a little bit. So pressing harder. Look, I've left a gap here where we have that pinkish underpainting showing through, so that we have the snout that's sort of concertinaed up. Bring some of this a little bit further around the edge of the nose. Start to get such a nice light, and that light is really helped by the illumination of the pink in there, which was with the 131 from Faber Castell. So we need to take areas of the nose a bit darker. We need to go in with the 706. We have used already the violet grey, but I think we need an actual grey in here. So 706. I'm going to put some red inside the nostrils as well. Well, a bit of a dark pinky colour. Again, I'm glazing over the top. We still have a nice pinky feeling to this. And then I'm going to swap to the 180. This is the Faber Castell brown, the one that I described as that kind of nice general brown. And pop in that shadow right under the snout. And then again, I'm glazing, so I'm mixing these together with light layers and bringing some of the brown up into the bottom of the snout. That's helping to tie these colour relationships together. Let's pop in the area of dark grey over the nose. 175, that is the sepia dark from Faber Castell. We've also got the 181, which is a Payne's grey. Would be nice for this because the 181 is a bit blue, but I'm trying to resist getting all of my pencils out and confusing everybody. Over the top of the patch that we've just put down, I'm going to go in with the 706 from Stabilo Carbothello and just create a few areas which are a little bit lighter, such as catching the edge of the nostril there, just to bring that back out. So, as I keep saying, I want to put a little bit of warmth inside the nose. I've got the 225 from Faber Castell. This is like a very rich plum colour. They do quite a few of these actually. So 194, 192, they would also probably work. And I'm just going to mix some of this into the edge of the nostril. So again, circular motions when you're mixing something, literally like mixing a cake. And it's just going to encourage the pigments to melt together. Does just help to bring a little bit of luminosity. I'm going to re-establish the dark of the inside as well. Pop a little bit up here for no reason at all other than I want to. You can kind of do your own thing with the nose, to be honest. It's a bit of a forgiving section, I think. So again, re-establishing the black right at the top. It does get muddy really easily, and it's quite amazing how much lighter it becomes, maybe even without you noticing. So it is well worth just going back around. And look at this, I've got my pencil holder instead. They're all just out on the desk. This always happens. Doesn't matter what my intentions are, they just end up back on the desk again. I'm going to take the 132 from Faber Castell. This is the original pink that I used to cover the entire nose with. I'm just going to work around into a few areas where I want to reintroduce a bit more pink. I might not press too hard in all of the areas. Some areas I might press harder. It depends how much I would like this to show up. Oh, we are losing the light. It looks like a cloud has come across. Sorry guys, we still see what we're doing. Let's just change that a little bit. There we go. It's really hard to film in summer because the light changes so much, and unfortunately my room is pretty much south facing, so the light in the afternoon really changes. But hopefully with a little bit of editing magic we can get away with this. Okay, so to finish the nose off, if you have it, I'm going to go in with an ivory. Doesn't have to be this ivory. This is Conte à Paris 047, but 103 from Faber Castell or 105 from Stabilo Carbocello. Just get a little bit of that nice yellow light on the edge of the nose, which you can see in the photograph. So let's just take stock a moment. This is a good moment to clean up the painting. Can you see we're starting to get speckles everywhere? So again, just tap it off. And then whatever doesn't fall off, you can go in and dab with your rubber. You always want to start by dabbing, literally trying to lift off the dirty pastel before using it like a rubber. Because when you use your putty rubber, by rubbing backwards and forwards, you can sometimes end up actually pushing the pastel further into the card. I know that sounds really odd, but it does happen. I would say that the velvet paper, that the velvet paper from Canson, it does, in my opinion, mark a little bit more easily than the pastel mat. I find it a little bit harder to get the any rogue marks out of the paper, I would say. All right, so we need to do the ears, and once the ears are in, we want to finish off all of the edges, which includes the neck as well. And we need to put some nice wispy hairs over the top of this black, but I want to probably finish this black before we put those edges over, much like doing the edges around the outside. They do really need to go in towards the end. So let's start off with the right hand ear. Structurally, this one is more important. It's catching quite a bit of light, and we need to create a nice sort of concave feeling in there as well. So I'm going to pick up the 225 from Faber Castell. This is the purple that I used for the inside of my nostrils. So whichever purple you've used, it could have been the 642 from Stabilo Carbocello even. That would have been a good shout actually. But you can see this is a little bit pinky, which is nice. It works to bring a little bit more luminosity into the ear than we have in the photograph, which to be honest, I quite like because it's bringing more light into the work. So you don't need to be too precious about this. Pop a load of that down, and then you can go over the top with the 132. So just shade nice and lightly. The 132 is a softer pencil than the 225, than that purple that I've just been using in here. So it's easier to blend the purple into this painting using the softer pencil, the 132, than it is using the purple because it's quite hard. I'm going to use the ivory, whichever ivory you've got, it really doesn't matter. I just got this out because I never use it, to be honest. Quite nice and soft though. Using it fairly lightly, I want to bring a little bit of yellow into the edge of the ear, just like we have on the snout, and just, you know, lift these areas up a little bit more. Pop some on the top of the ear as well. There goes the sun again. So let's finish off where the black meets the ear. So if I take my black, I'm again using the Koh-i-Noor for this. It doesn't matter, use whatever black you have. First off, we have a strong black shadow, which just sits inside the opening of the ear. So we've got the top of the ear coming around. This sits underneath the top of the ear. And I'm going to be quite gentle with the pencil around the edges to make sure that it blends in nicely. This shadow sits back into the shadow right at the base of the ear, and then almost outlines it by coming underneath. Being again nice and light with my shading marks. So this pencil is quite dusty. If your black is dusty, just make sure that you do tap your work off regularly because it will kind of travel around without you realising. I've now picked up the 175 from Faber Castell, which is the warm dark grey. I'm using that just to blend the black. Okay, let's give that a bit of a tap off so that we don't have all the black travelling everywhere. And then we need to work on the top before we put those hairs into this section. So 706, that is our sort of mid-grey that we've been using. I'm going to gently start at the top of the ear I'm not pressing very hard with this. There's still actually quite a bit of tooth of the card at the top of the ear. Just bring in a bit of soft light. You have all sorts of little details and textures happening on the ear. Again, this is aimed at sort of early intermediate or beginner plus. It might have to be beginner plus plus. So I don't want to make this too complicated and get into loads of textures right now. The 700 is going to start to bring some light onto the top of the ear though. And then we'll begin to bring out some of the hairs. Probably do need to go to bismuth white. But while I've got the 700 out, I'm just going to gently start to bring some of these lighter hairs over the top of the black, which this always happens. I just forgot to finish earlier, guys. Now, I usually finish a portrait and then look at it and think, oh, I've left one of the ears and I've just not filled it in, or if there's an eye over on the other side, which we've left out in this case on purpose. But you know, sometimes I just don't put them in. I just forget that they're there, and it takes until I've finished it to realise. Okay, let's get that bismuth white out and slap some light into this. So this is the 811 bismuth white from Caran d'Ache. So my nice light value, very strong. Again, if you don't have this, use whichever white you have available to you. So if you've got a weaker white, if you're using Stabilo, Carbocello or something else that you don't trust it entirely to show up, you just want to make sure that the underpainting isn't too strong and you leave a little bit more tooth in the card. Okay, I'm just wiping this off to make sure I'm not dragging loads of dirt around. Oh, look at all this lovely light that we get now. It makes such a big difference. Really just think about lifting that pencil. It's really important. I'm going to put a little bit of ivory in there. I can see it in the photo and I'm just thinking, why not? Let's just pop a little bit of ivory in. Okay, then I'm going to swap to the 700, which is the light grey from Stabilo Carbocello. I always have to think before I say it. I always want to say Cretacolor, which is a brand that I've not actually got out today. Bring some of these little hairs up the edge of the ear. So much practice for fur in this project. Lots of tiny little hairs inside the ears. They won't show up too much. The value of the pencil is quite similar to a lot of the underpainting. Okay, we need a bit more black down and then we can finish that section off. But of course, as I said, before we do that, we need to put the other ear in, which again, structurally is just not as important. Obviously it does need to go in, but it's not hugely important. So I'm going to start with the 175, which is the warm dark grey from Faber Castell. Now, what I want to do on this side is work in circles and purposely leave tooth of the card available so we don't actually fill everything in and make it quite as dark as we see even in the reference photo. So I'm trying to use the texture of the paper to help me to create the texture of the pig skin. So in some areas I've pressed a little bit harder and in other areas I've just allowed the pencil to scumble over the top. And then using the same pencil, I can add some fine little hairs off the edge. So do make sure that your pencil is sharp enough to do this. Again, I've moved my whole painting so that I have a better angle to draw from. I do apologise because I know when you're watching it, it means that the painting's constantly moving around, but it just makes a really big difference when you're drawing, and it stops you, or it helps to prevent an injury, especially if you are, like me, drawing quite a lot of the time. You don't want to be drawing at a bad angle. It's terrible for your shoulder, for your back, all the rest of it. So you can see we don't need to go into a ton of detail over there. To finish that off, 706. And I can just bring in a little bit, just a touch of light grey. The main reason I want to be careful about how much light grey is in there is because the light grey is has opacity in it, it has white in it, and that allows it to kind of come forward in a pictorial plane, whereas we want this to sit further back. So I'm going to leave that ear really, really simple. We know what it is. It doesn't need to do much more. We are now on to the fun bit, the finishing off stage. So if you take your preferred black, I'm going to take the Koh-i-Noor, and what I'm going to do is lay in some more black over the top of where we've already been. And what we want is the black to become really solid right next to our piglet. So that means that we can't see the tooth of the card. So a soft black is going to be better for this. So if you've got a black chalk, that would also be good. And I'm getting lighter with the pressure. Okay, so I've kind of given him a little bit of a collar there. Then I'm going to take my soft tool. So you could use a clean finger, as I've said. You could also use a makeup tool. I'm just going to lift this gently. Now, with a soft tool, they will disintegrate quite quickly if you're too heavy-handed. So you really don't need to put very much pressure, if any, through the soft tool, and make sure that you lift it off the card as you work. I'm going to take my putty rubber, and I just like to reshape them before I start so that I can make sure that I get a fairly flat edge, but also that it's clean. And you can just really lightly run this around the bottom of your painting. You can see it gives it a nice sfumato effect, so a smoky effect. Keep reshaping it. So just encouraging that with my finger. Probably going to leave it about there. Obviously, if you want to do more of the pig, be my guest. But now we get to do the edge details, which, as you can probably tell, is the bit I'm most excited about. So you want to make sure that your pencil is sharp enough. Now, I would like to try and use my Caran d'Ache. As I've already said, I've got a few little problems with mine, so whether it's going to be sharp enough, I might just have to be a little bit cunning with it. And then also need the light grey. So let's start off with the ear. Just seen, look, this is what happens. I've missed a patch here, look. This needs to become black. That works. That makes so much more sense. Okay, so this is the 700. Just bringing these little hairs off the edge of the ear. Let's bring the Caran d'Ache down a little bit further, but not as many of them. So again, that really bright effect. Oh, let's see, this is the problem. It's completely broken on the inside. Let's just clean that up a second. Let's use the Chinese white. Go. Just so that those hairs don't suddenly start and stop, like I said down here, they need to be woven together. So I've actually got, had enough white to be able to actually sharpen it using my sanding paper, which is really nice. So I'm just using it very lightly, but I'm just going to make these hairs on the bottom of the ear a little bit brighter. And then move on to the white fur down here. So this is where really the only thing that needs to happen to this section for a drawing like this, where again, we're not going into every single little detail. We need to create texture by allowing the edges to sit over the top of the black. You're going to need to clean your pencil when you do this. The white is going to start to get dirty and it dumps black back into this area here. So just make sure that you just wipe it off and then carry on. So you don't have to use the Chinese white for this. Anything that shows up It's going to depend on the paper you're using, remember. You might be like, oh, I don't need a white because my light grey is showing up really well. It might be because your underpainting is a bit thinner than mine, or your paper is behaving differently because it's a different brand. So just keep bringing these nice wispy hairs over the top of the black. And we've got some very, very small ones down here. I'm not pressing too hard with the white. I don't want them to be too bright. And these basically run in the direction of the chin there. They don't stick down, they run along. Just bring a few over the top of that light grey that we put in way back at the beginning. And then we can start to add some texture to the bottom of that light grey section. Again, I'm not pressing too hard with this white, so it's not going to show up too bright in these sections. As we move our way around, I'm afraid, again, I'm going to have to twist my paper so that I can get a good angle to draw from. So let's pop her upside down. This is where more pressure for them to show out more brightly. And just have a look at your reference photo to get inspiration for direction. You also want to make sure that these markings start within this section. They don't start on blank card. So that ensures that the hairs are actually attached to our pig. It's very important, but it's also quite easy not to realise that, oh, my hairs are just floating and they're not properly attached. Just turn it around again. We can see what kind of effect this is starting to have. Smaller hairs coming off the nose. Got some bigger whiskers just down here. Pop them in. See, that hair isn't attached. Let's move it back. Right, we've got a lot of hairs that stick out from the bottom of the eyelid. So again, apology folks, I'm just going to turn this round. So these they're quite long and they come right down. And then up at the top, you've got the lashes. Nice, quick pencil markings. Let's just make sure that we've got some smaller ones in here instead of this big gap. You just curve a little bit more where the eye is. And then again, moving my paper, just making sure that it's a comfortable angle, bringing these light hairs up over the top of the far ear, and that allows the far ear to sit backwards. Now we have these little hairs that are sticking out at the top. So some of these are already in, to be honest. I don't want to overdo it, but at the same time, this rim light is really important for this portrait, because otherwise she's quite flat. Okay, just want one curving inwards. Making sure all of those hairs are nicely attached as you go. So something to do at the end is just to touch up the eye with your black. It will have picked up dust during this process and won't be as black as it was at the start. And that's quite an important area to be black. So just make sure that that is looking as you want it. You can again clean up anything to do with the reflection as well if you need to. Blow off the dust. Sorry guys, blowing into the microphone there. And then I would say for this quick portrait, we are done. Now I say quick, it's still taking me a few hours to do this. I fully appreciate for most people this is going to take much, much longer. So please don't let me insult you when I say that. And I'm going to use the 131, I think, to sign her with. One little piglet portrait in pastel pencils. So this has really been inspired by a full-length tutorial which is out on the membership right now, and it is mother and piglet together, which is a really lovely scene. It's a little bit more complex. We've obviously got a little bit of the straw happening, we've got the legs and two figures as well at once, but it's a great project to get stuck into. So if you have enjoyed this one, definitely go and check that one out next. You've got pretty much all the pencils that you need for it already. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about this class. I do like to know what people think. And until next time, happy drawing.